In this video, I'm going to show you how I redid my red oak hardwood floor using Bona products. When we first got this house, the floors were a glossy orange-red color, and I really wanted to lighten them and make them look more matte and cozy, so I decided to refinish them. I started by taping off the windows using wrap to minimize the amount of dust that gathers on the glass. I also sealed off the vents to keep the dust from getting into the vent system. Next, I rented an orbital sander from my local Home Depot and started sanding. I first used 36 grit, followed by 60 grit, and then 100 grit. Since this is a random orbital sander and not a belt sander, the direction in which you sand doesn't matter, but I still tried to stay in a relatively straight line. I decided to use a random orbital sander rather than a belt sander because a belt sander is much more aggressive and less forgiving, and it can create gouges in your floor if you leave it in one spot for too long. I will say though that this orbital sander took a really long time to take the thick finish off of my floor. I'm showing you just one pass of the sander across the floor, but when all was said and done, I think I made at least 10 passes across each part of the floor to get the finish off. And it took me several days to do the downstairs area excluding the kitchen. So if you're in a time crunch and don't want to play around with an orbital sander, a belt sander would definitely be quicker for this. Next, I used a palm sander to sand off the edges. Home Depot did have a special edge sander for floors that could accomplish this quicker, but at this point I had already rented the orbital sander for 2 weeks and I didn't want to rent any more sanders for this project. The palm sander took a while, but it got the job done. I had this built-in in my living room that I took out, and it was sitting directly on the subfloor. The hardwood was cut at 45 degrees to fit around the built-in. I wanted to extend the hardwood in this area. To do this, I first used my track saw to remove the boards that were cut at 45 degrees. I made 2 cuts per board, which allowed me to take out those boards without having to remove the planks above or below them. By cutting the board into 3 sections, I could pry out the middle section and then carefully remove the other 2 sections without damaging the tongue and grooves of the nearby boards. After I was done, I used a hammer and a tapping block to gently slide the new boards into the gaps. I had a few places where I had a gap in the middle of the floor with planks to the left and right of it. Of course, it's almost impossible to find a board that is the perfect size to accommodate that gap, so I had to create my own board. To do this, I first measured the length of the gap, and I cut a plank on the groove end to the length of that distance. I then created a new groove at the cut end of the board using my router table. This created the perfect size plank to fit into the slot. I tapped the board using my tapping block, and I used nails to secure each new board I placed, and resanded the whole area to make the planks even with one another. Then I vacuumed and dusted the floor several times to make sure it was completely clean. I had a little vacuum helper assist with this step. Next, it was time for the Bona Red Out. This product is intended to remove the red color from red oak. There are 2 steps involved. Since you're supposed to apply the second part before the first part is fully dry, it really helps to have a second pair of hands for this. My pair of extra hands used the cutting tool to apply step 1 at all of the edges of the room, while I rolled the product on using a paint roller to the rest of the floor. Before the first part was fully dried and when all standing puddles of part 1 were gone, I applied step 2 of the product. You're supposed to wear proper skin and eye protection as well as a respirator when applying this red out, and I'm not gonna lie, running around trying to get the whole floor covered with step 1 and then step 2 was exhausting. We were both sweating by the time we were finished with this. The next day, the floor already looked much lighter and less red, but there were some white streaks of bleach here and there, so I gave the floor a gentle sand with a palm sander and 100 grit sandpaper. You don't have to sand too much here because it can remove the top layer of wood and undo the bleaching that you just did. After that, I applied several coats of Bona Nordic Seal to the floor. I read that this product can get streaky, so I kept the coats thin and applied about 4 to 5 coats in total. Even though that's not exactly per their instructions, this made the product more usable for me and it kept the floor streak-free. After that, I applied 3 full coats of Bona Seal in HD Raw, which is supposed to be their ultra matte formulation that's meant to mimic the look of raw wood. I did one final sand before my last coat of finish, and here's how the floors turned out. I absolutely love how they look. It's tough to get the exact tone to reflect on camera, but they look very light beige and beautiful in person, and the finish really does look like natural wood so much that it took me a while to even feel comfortable walking on them. Don't forget to stay tuned for more videos.